Welcome to Living Well with MS Coffee Break, a part of the Overcoming MS podcast family, made for people with multiple sclerosis interested in making healthy lifestyle choices. Today, you'll meet someone living with MS from our global Overcoming MS community. Our guests will share their personal perspective on the positive and practical lifestyle changes they have made which have helped them lead a fuller life. You can check out our show notes for more information and useful links. You can find these on our website at overcomingms.org/podcast. If you enjoy the show, please spread the word about us on your social media channels. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. So, get your favourite drink ready and let's meet our guest. Joining us on this episode of the Living Well with MS Coffee Break is Luke Johnson from Massachusetts in the northwest of the United States. So welcome, Luke.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Our audience wants to know a bit about you and your life. So could you share some background info about your family, personal life, where you're from, what you do, to give listeners a sense of who you are?
Yeah. Well, I live in Western Mass. I work, and this sort of changed for me. I went to graduate school for a few different things, and when I got MS, that changed. I had to kind of pivot big time from that. And it was a couple of years after getting diagnosed, and I was diagnosed about 8 years ago, and that will be in like a few days, actually. It was a couple of years of that, and in conjunction with finding the OMS protocol that I decided to pursue a career in basically fitness and wellness. So I was sort of trying to walk the talk, and that gets overused, but I really wanted to do that. My diagnosis was like many. It was very quick, and many in the States. I mean, I had an MRI, a spinal tap, all this stuff, and then I'm learning that I have MS, and I felt like I needed to pivot into something that was going to keep me moving, keep me focused. And the kind of work I was doing before just didn't seem. I was working for years in wilderness therapy programs.
Yeah, in the UK we call a spinal tap a lumbar puncture, which is a shame because Spinal Tap's my favourite film.
Yeah. Stonehenge. It's one of my favorite Spinal Tap songs.
Yeah, I've actually seen Spinal Tap at Glastonbury Festival. They came on and they had Stonehenge.
Oh, yeah.
When did you come across the OMS program, and what was your experience, and why did you start following OMS?
Yeah, so it was about 2 years in, and I was going through what a lot of people with RRMS will go through. I was kind of cycling through some of the meds, trying to figure out what was working best for me. I was on beta-seron. That failed for me. Then I hopped on Copaxone, and it was around that time I learned from my partner, I learned of OMS, and she is like a bona fide scientist. She works at local college, and it was very important for me because she was able to kind of distill it down and call the data, look at the peer-reviewed literature, kind of get a better sense of whether this was something that I could take very seriously. And she convinced me, and I started it. I started immediately. I had a pretty good discipline around my health and exercise and such before. So to see that it was something I could do, that, we were just talking about this, the way I looked at it was, sort of worst case, maybe my MS doesn't shift in the direction I needed to, but, best case, it's like I actually have some improvement in my MS, and worst case, I'm already on a very robust diet that would actually benefit my health in big ways. So I was looking at it like a win-win no matter what. So I started it immediately, and I think very quickly I could understand that it was like I could have a real kind of attitude, a shift around like what I could do to actually improve things for myself. We had this real kind of take your medicine and wait and see attitude around MS with my neurologist, and I really wanted I really wanted something I could do with more agency, right? So for me, the OMS protocol was something I could do, just kind of, um, I could kind of add more to like whatever it is, I wanted to do to actually improve my own chances in the trajectory of MS. Um, so I think very early on, I looked at it like, every little bit of flax or fish oil at the time, we've kind of shifted towards flax more, at least I have, which I'm thankful for. But veggies and cheeseless nights, all that was every time I kind of did that, I could look at it as taking a positive step towards my own health. Whereas taking the medicine for me, that was also good. And I felt like I had some sense of security around that. But to me, that felt more passive, whereas the OMS protocol felt like a much more, because it was a more personal agency, I felt like it was a more aggressive tact for me, and that was important.
And what did you find hardest to implement of the OMS protocols?
Well, I think because, and I think this is probably in my interactions with people who have explored this protocol, that we have, at least here in the States, we have an attitude a lot of times around wanting things quickly. I work in fitness and wellness. I have clients, and when their goals are around strength or weight loss or what have you, they want things quickly, and it's frustrating that it takes time. And I think with something like MS, especially when you're several years, like when you were just saying that you were kind of many years into your disease before you got diagnosed. I think for people who are many years in, it can be very frustrating that, you have X number of symptoms, right? And you start with your flax, and you start with, adhering to the protocol. You're avoiding cheese, you're avoiding, heavy omega-6 things. And week one goes by, a month goes by, and you're not feeling any better, right? That's hard. People want things quickly. And for me, that time we mentioned the oil tanker analogy, and that it takes a lot of time to kind of turn, or the battleship, turning the battleship around. When there's momentum, it takes time. And for me, that time was like 2 years. And that was very hard to deal with. After 4 or 5 months, I'm like, all right, well, I'm not getting worse. That's good. But I wanted to see some improvements. But those improvements didn't come around for me for a couple of years. But I remember the day where I'm out biking and I'm like, oh, I didn't even have this awareness that my left hand wasn't numb. I was shifting. I was playing fetch with my dog. Like, things were feeling better. And wow, when I had that realization, it just, it was like, it felt like, there has been, I had crossed like the Rubicon or something. Like, it was a big deal for me.
Yeah, I found similar, and I had double vision was one of my symptoms. And because I didn't have it all the time, then I didn't really notice when I wasn't having it. And it was only after a while I thought, hang on, that hasn't happened for weeks.
Yeah.
And normally it would happen probably daily. And then I didn't really notice, because it didn't happen every day. It didn't notice it. It sort of started to go from, almost daily to, or maybe twice a week, to maybe weekly, to, oh, it hasn't happened in weeks. Oh, and then it just carried on, and it has never happened since. And so it was a slow thing. And it was actually my neurologist in a way who convinced me that OMS was doing something, because he said, you've got over relapses. Once you've got over a relapse, another year down the line, you don't normally see improvements. Mm-hmm. So he said those improvements are coming because of something you're doing to improve your situation. It's a progressive condition, so you shouldn't really see improvements.
Yeah, and I'm sure that flew in the face of what he'd learned, and my neurologist sort of, he had the attitude of like, he was interesting because he was pretty Pollyanna about it. When I first got it, he was like, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. And I said, I hope so. But, I knew he was just saying, you're a young guy, you're fit, you're going to be good. I see much worse than you. And, it was very early days. And I knew that, even though he was being very positive, that was not going to necessarily be my outcome at all. And I really wanted to do some things to kind of, to mitigate the progression. But, one thing that really drives home for me with this protocol, and, it took years to get better. And then when I started getting better, I started to have, I started to realize that before I was actually diagnosed, things like fatigue, heat sensitivity, things of that nature were always present. I just didn't quite understand it. It was always kind of lurking under the radar. But after years on it, and I've been on it about 5.5, 6 years now, that a lot of these things they just cleared up for me, my fatigue and things like that. And I never had like super debilitating relapses. It was fatigue. It was my left eye, things of that nature. But, one thing I want to stress was that, there's a podcaster I really like who he's a vegan athlete and, he's in recovery and I'm not in recovery, but he throws around this notion that the road gets narrower. And I find that very interesting because what happened for me was, first you're making these changes around your diet and then you start making these changes around your exercise schedule. You start having earlier nights, things like that. Maybe you're reevaluating, you're taking a more introspective look at your own life. You're interrogating aspects like your friendships, maybe your relationship with work, your relationship with stress, all these things start happening. And that happened because I chose a path like OMS. That wouldn't have happened for me if I was like, all right, I hear about this OMS thing. I'm just going to take the best drug I'm aware of. And that's okay if that's what someone wants to do. I'm not saying that is what one has to do. But for me personally, taking the OMS protocol and for me, that was like I was able to confront a lot of, sort of delusional behaviors I had around my own health. That, I could get away with being really active, but also, eating a bunch of, food that might not have been so healthy for me, or maybe being more stressed out with my job, maybe having kind of relationships with people that weren't good for me. So it was like this kind of radical change that happened that I don't think would have happened if I had only taken a kind of a drug that I had confidence in. Like, does that make sense? Like I was able to do so much more because this was a very lifestyle focused change and not just, taking a drug that I thought was going to help me.
Yeah, there's so many side benefits as well. I mean, just the mindful side of things. Yeah, like, I'm really conscious I'm getting stressed out, and I know that stress is going to cause my symptoms to get worse. That's almost instant.
Yeah.
So I use mindfulness techniques, just like micro mindfulness, if you like, just try and
totally.
Just use my breathing, try and chill myself out. And that's just a good thing, it just stops me getting stressed. And it annoys my wife sometimes because sometimes she wants to have an argument. It's just something, I don't know, I didn't put the bins out or something. And she'll be wanting to have an argument about it. And she'll say, you're just doing that breathing thing, aren't you? Not getting and chilling yourself out.
Yeah, no, exactly.
She wants a big round.
It's there's like the road is long, kind of like there's you start doing something like you're vegan with fish, you're being very careful around your diet, and then you incorporate mindfulness, and for me, like when I started this diet, I couldn't metabolize alcohol. So, I like to have a couple beers sometimes. That actually became a little bit more difficult. I didn't feel so good. I didn't sleep as well. I was like, all right, well, maybe I'm not really drinking much anymore. And these things kind of happened for me. And then, you start changing your relationship around work and stress and all that, as we said. And I've really appreciated that aspect because, again, I confronted a lot of things around my own life. And stress is a big one too, right? I mean, I think, when you start eating differently, and you have a different relationship with those foods, and that kind of takes time. But when you start confronting stress, that can kind of seep into a lot of aspects of your life, right? And it's critical for something like MS, of course.
So we're recording this in early 2021, which is obviously an unusual time because of COVID-19. So have you had to adapt your daily healthy habits to the realities of COVID-19, and how have you managed with following the OMS program in these times?
Yeah, I mean, For me, because I work at a college, I have a staff faculty position teaching and running a facility there at a college locally here. And right when COVID hit, I was furloughed. So I've pretty much been in that kind of limbo state since. So for me personally, I haven't had to do a ton to change my lifestyle beyond, well, I mean, that's kind of ridiculous. I've had to do a lot of things to change, but as far as like the diet itself, I've made that, number one priority. But I'm not exposing myself to people. I'm doing things like we're doing here. I'm Zoom chatting friends.
And how are you managing with exercise?
Exercise has been a little bit trickier, and that's a good question. I liked going to gyms because of the social connection there. I enjoyed that. I liked seeing people. I think that's as important as the exercise, right? In interfacing with people and getting the kind of oxytocin blast from having those connections. For me, I've actually taken a lot more of a compassionate route on my own exercise. So I'm focused on hiking with my dog, walking. I'll get on the exercise bike occasionally. But a lot of these things, and I'll ski sometimes too, but a lot of these things are not open to me because I can't go to the gym, right? So I'm trying to get into some strength work. I do some yoga on TV, whatever I can get. But I think what's, beneficial is when you have the foundation of a really good diet, I feel like you have a little bit of flexibility there. Like I'm not feeling like I'm constantly fighting against exercise so long as I get a good solid walk in a day with my dog, things of that nature.
And for a bit of a left field question, do you have any unusual interests or wacky hobbies that you could tell us about?
Wacky hobbies. I think, we were talking before we started recording. I think one thing that I do a lot is the cold exposure stuff, but that's probably not too wacky in the OMS world. So I do a lot of stuff like that. I do a lot of mindfulness work. Interestingly, before I got sick, I had just done a 10-day silent retreat. And that was very rigorous. No talking, no texting, no phone, no exercise, no nothing but meditating and not even looking at people for 10 days. And right after like 2 months of that, I get sick. So I was kind of in this sort of, I don't know, maybe that was really important for me in terms of getting my head wrapped around this, the enormity of something like getting MS, because that's like a sea change for anyone, right? But
that's pretty full on. 10 days. That's just 10 days of just meditating, literally not speaking.
Yeah, it was interesting. I signed up for it, and then I got laid off from a job, and I wasn't going to be able to take it, but because of that, I was able to take the retreat, and so I did it, and then 2 months later I got sick. So I was like, wow, the timing of this is kind of surreal. But no, I don't, my hobbies are probably fairly pedestrian.
Okay. And
I like a lot of like, I read a lot of like the ancient Stoics, things along those lines. I have like a copy of Marcus Aurelius on my bed, on my nightstand. I read that. So, I mean, things like that, I guess.
And just to wrap up, is there one piece of advice that you would give to anyone who's new to the OMS program?
Yeah, I mean, sort of beyond what I was saying around, having appropriate expectations. I think that's huge. I do think driving, this home, I think when I first learned of the OMS protocol and I was a few years in and I was feeling good. And I had this first awareness that, wow, I'm actually, my health is getting better. And I knew some people locally who had MS and I couldn't wait to tell them about this. And it was interesting because one was excited and one was like, no, thanks. I have no interest in that. And I think that was hard for me because I had this like attitude like, wow, how could you not want to do this. And that, I had kind of some reckoning there. And I think what occurred to me there is that, she wasn't ready to embark on a challenge like this, because it is challenging to make a big radical change like this. But I think if you decide that you want to do something like follow this protocol and you're willing to put in the effort to make those changes, to be really compassionate with yourself. There's an awesome kind of responsibility to have the belief. Like for me, I decided early on, like, I think this can make a big positive change. And there was a lot of pressure there for me, because every time I slipped up, like 6 days, I was A-okay. And then, then one day I'm non-compliant and I sneak in a few handfuls of corn chips, and then I'm 10 handfuls of corn chips. And I feel awful about myself, like I'm having a relapse, right? That was kind of, that attitude could be a little bit destructive. So I kind of came around to like, it's okay. I'm taking in that, think about a week, I'm taking 6 positive steps forward and I'm taking 1 step back. And after a while, I got, fully compliant and I didn't make mistakes, and I was happier about that. But I think compassion is a huge piece here, and you need to be okay with not being perfect from the running, right? Because it's hard. I mean, for some people, who maybe don't already have a really rigorous relationship around their food and exercise, there's a lot to be asked for to incorporate, 30 to 90 minutes or something of exercise a day, and then, doing all these giant dietary lifestyle switches. So
yeah, I think when you read the book, that each chapter, if you like, they talk about how much improvement statistically you can get, and you think, well, okay, if I do this, I could get a 20% less chance of having relapses.
Yes.
And so if you're doing, you're doing mindfulness and you've given up saturated fats, you're maybe still eating chicken or something. It's like, okay, you've done a lot of things there. You've everything you do, it's not just an on or off thing. So I think if people are coming to OMS and they think, well, I can't,
like a zero sum.
Yeah, you're still doing, if you do 75% of OMS, then you can actually, you're still massively improving your potential future disease course. Obviously, it would be ideal if you're fully compliant, but certainly, I mean, it is a massive. I mean, I just went full on. I mean, I think it's just the way I am, and I just sort of did it 100% day one. But equally, I mean, I've not made deliberate mistakes, but I did have a pizza that I thought had vegan cheese on it, and they mistakenly gave me real cheese. Now I just don't have any cheese because I'm not really keen on vegan cheese, it turns out.
No.
And the restaurant were horrified because they thought they were going to kill me because they thought I was probably going to have an allergic reaction or something. But then I thought there's no point in stressing about it because, like you say, if I'm having 6 good days and 1 bad one, then, and I kind of think about it as like rolling the dice. And if you roll a double 6 and you'll have a relapse, well, all you've done is you've just rolled the dice once. Ideally, stop rolling the dice. But if you roll the dice occasionally, what are the odds on getting a double 6? Pretty low. And I wasn't getting a relapse every day. No one is. So ultimately, you're, and if it's progressive MS, you're not actually, each day you're not getting markedly worse than the day before. If you can try and, reduce the days where the chances of getting a bit worse are there, then great. But I think if you're starting out, then doing what you can.
I mean, that's the thing too. And I work in the world of New Year's resolutions, right? And I see that, and people are very hard on themselves with creating, sometimes unrealistic expectations. I think rarer is the person who can say, I need to do these 9 to 10 things and just turn it over the next day. That's pretty rare. So for someone to be able to get it right 6 days out of 7, or even 4 days out of 7, at least for a few months, and then starting getting better, that's okay. I think it takes time, but I think it's easy if you have the expectation that you are going to get it 100% right away, that it's easier to quit, wholly quit the process. And I think that could be, obviously, as someone who supports this, I think that would be pretty bad.
Okay, with that, thank you very much for joining us, Luke Johnson.
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS Coffee Break. Please check out this episode's show notes at overcomingms.org/podcast. You'll find all sorts of useful links and bonus information there. If you would like to be featured in a future Coffee Break episode or have any suggestions, please email us at podcast@overcomingms.org. You can also subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Living Well with MS Coffee Break is kindly supported by a grant from the Happy Charitable Trust. If you would like to support the Overcoming MS charity and help keep our podcast advertising free, you can donate online at overcomingms.org/donate. Thank you for your support. Living Well with MS Coffee Break is produced by Overcoming MS, the world's leading multiple sclerosis healthy lifestyle charity. We are here to help inform, support and empower everyone affected by MS. To find out more and subscribe to our e-newsletter, please visit our website at overcomingms.org. Thanks again for tuning in and see you next time.